Welcome back, guys. This is my new to me 2011 KTM SXF 350. It's a 350cc 4-stroke. It's electric start and it's fuel injected. I recently sold my other KTM, which is a 252-stroke. That one was a 2001. I'd completely gone through that one. If you want to check that bike out, I'll put a link up above. That bike was super cherry. But I sold it, and I bought this, and I bought my grandson a Yamaha TTR 50 so that him and I could ride together. Today we're going to do an oil change on it, and we're going to do a quick service. We're going to go through some things and just check things out. When I bought this bike, supposedly it had about 26 and a half original hours on it is what the owner told me. I don't know as if it's got quite 26 and a half because it does have an hour meter on it. It's an aftermarket hour meter, but I don't think it has a lot. I bought this bike a little over 2 hours away from my house, and when I got there, these are some of the things that I examined to determine, does it actually have 26 and a half original hours? Somebody on Marketplace can put brand new plastics on a bike and say it's, you know, a brand new bike. How do you really know unless it came factory with a meter, or you can actually read the ECM or the computer on the bike? This actually has a computer on it. So some of the things that you can check out to look at, the pegs, you can see how these pegs are still super sharp. They're the original pegs that came from KTM. A bike with a lot of time on it, these will get worn right down real heavy. Same thing with the brake teeth on them. Yeah, you can replace the teeth on these, but generally people aren't replacing pegs, and if they are, a lot of times there'll be a lot of slop in the pegs. There isn't here. These are tight. This looks good. The side case doesn't look like this cover's been off it, and the wear would be consistent with something around that, between 20 and 40 hours. Right here is an item that tends to wear out a lot on the KTMs. There tends to get a lot of slop with a lot of time in here. There isn't. These wishbones tend to get kind of sloppy over time. Doesn't look like these have ever been apart, and it doesn't look like anyone's ever put a nut on them, and it doesn't look as though anyone's ever adjusted this shock using like an improper tool. Sometimes if people use like a sloppy screwdriver or something, these adjusters will get all mushroomed out a little bit. Got the original radiator hoses. The suspension has zero play and zero slop in it. And on these KTMs, typically the upper shock linkage will start to get sloppy in these, and this has, like I said, no slop or no play. And then when you start looking at the adjusting nuts for the chain, there's very little wear on any of these, and I don't see any markings down here where this is ridden for a long while in a different position. So again, not a lot of tool marks on these nuts, which also indicate to me that these haven't been adjusted much. Then I look at the brakes. The thin clearance on these, I've mic'd them, is 3.5 millimeters. That's the minimum. And these have like 4.5, so there's still a lot of life on them. If you look at the rims, these are factory Excel rims. They're not all beat up. There's no scratches anywhere. There's no dents. It does have a different tire on the back than listed from the manufacturer, but it has the original Bridgestone tire on the front with a date code of the 24th month of 2010. So that would be the original tire to the bike, and it feels it. It's hard. It's not very pliable. Somebody's put some aftermarket billet radiator guards in it. You see this bolt right here? That bolt's actually loose. I noticed on this side that bolt has been replaced. I don't think that that's a factory bolt. Maybe that's why. Maybe the other one vibrated out. The plastics appear to be all stock original KTM plastics. The exhaust is all original. And the sprocket appears to be original. It says KTM on it. The sprockets do look to be about at the end of their life. And if you look at the front sprocket, this one looks fairly bad. You can see how it's rounded over forward. And the front sprocket typically wears out 2 times faster than the rear anyway, so I would expect it to be that way. The shift lever, these are all made of aluminum. These will wear out pretty quick with some heavy use, and that has no signs of heavy use on it. It does have little wear right there from where you'd shift up. The front rotor is all original. I'm not sure about the brake pads. I'll have to look into that. a little bit further to find out if the brake pads have been replaced. I would think probably, but maybe not if it's really 26.5 hours. These are the billet aftermarket radiator guards. This is the bolt that holds the seat on, and that's the original bolt, and as you can see, it hasn't had a wrench or a socket put on it a whole bunch of times. If you use this a lot and you're taking your seat off a ton, this will have a tendency to have some rash on it just from putting a fastener on it all the time. It looks to me like the head might have been off this at one point, and I think that this bike might have had a recall on it. And I can't remember what it is. I read it somewhere, so they probably would have taken the head off for that recall, and that would explain the light fastener marks on this. And someone else said in one of the forums that this, see this breather tube down here, that all KTMs have this breather tube that run down, and a good indicator if a bike has a lot of time on it is you pull this tube out. You see how that's shiny right there. That one little area is super shiny. That tube will get abraded from that air boot right there, and you'll feel an indentation on the back of the tube. I wish I could turn this. It's kind of hard, but and this has none. There's no. It's not worn in on any of the places where this tube touches on the way down. You can see down here there's something too that it might touch on. There's no abrasion there. I bought this bike and I paid $3,000 for it as of this month. So we are currently in July of 2023. That's what I paid for this bike. Again, it's electric start and it's fuel injected, which is super nice. Looks like someone has replaced the chain along the way, and this chain is a Regina chain, and it does kind of look like it feels like it might be a little tight, but I'm not sure. But I'm wondering if somebody actually bought this bike, left the stock sprockets on it, because these do appear to be stock, and just bought a gold chain for it to make it look snazzy and left it on the original sprockets. But this chain does feel to be pretty worn out. If you take your chain and pull it back like that, and you start seeing this part of the sprocket, that indicates that the chain is a little worn, and you can see in there. Another indicator that the chain is worn is if you push it in and it can touch the tire. Same goes this way as if it comes out. It just feels a little worn out. So I feel pretty confident that this bike is a fairly low hour bike. The air filter that was in it, I took the air filter off when I got it. It was the twin air filter. It had no oil in it. None. It had no oil whatsoever. I know it had been oiled before because there is some like staining on the top of the filter. But other than that, there was no oil in this filter whatsoever. It was completely dry. It had been oiled because the inside of the airbox had a little bit of remnants that the oil is dripping out of this. And I cleaned up the inside of the airbox. So at some point it had been oiled for a while, looked fairly faithfully. Then someone just didn't bother to oil it. So I'm not overly concerned about that either. The bike takes a little over 1 liter of oil, and it's a little low, and I'm guessing that's because probably somebody just put in a 1 liter and called it a day. Oh yeah, it's pretty dirty. And these KTMs have a magnetic drain plug, so we'll be able to see any of the particles in there. Oh yeah. Well, it's not milky though, so that's good. So that means it doesn't have a blown head gasket. It hadn't had an oil change in a long while, I can tell. I'd say this bike has gone a long time without an oil change. Real long time. Well, that's still draining. I'll now pull out the filter screen, which is right here. This came out pretty easy. Probably has never been out. Not for a long time, I would guess. Curious to see what this looks like. We'll wash this out with some contact cleaner. That's what that looks like, right there. I've cleaned the filter and I've cleaned the cap out, and I'm just going to feed it back in. I don't know what the torque spec is. I'll look all this stuff up after when we're done. Before I pull the oil filter out, I'm going to put the drain plug back in, and I also put a new copper crush washer on it as well. And again, I'll also find out what the torque value is for this before we button it all up. Take these out. I'm curious to see how this filter looks. I'd say that the oil has not been changed in quite a while. I am going to cut this filter open also at some point. Wow. It is dirty. Super dirty. It's got shavings in it too. Looks like it's got fine metal shavings in it. I don't know if that's normal or not, but I did a little research on the internet. It's not anything to be too concerned over. This seems to be more problematic if you're not changing your oil as often as you should. Then you'll see a little bit of filings and stuff like that and some metallic, and that's exactly what we were seeing. I think the previous owner probably wasn't too religious with their maintenance, and we're probably seeing pieces of the clutch and clutch basket and anything else that's, you know, naturally wearing inside the transmission and gearbox. I'm running what they call for oil, which is the Motorex. Everything I've watched on the internet says to put a little bit of oil on the filter before you put it in, so that's what we'll do. Yeah, that makes sense though, guys. I mean, the reason you change your oil all the time in these bikes isn't necessarily because the engine's wearing out. It's because the oil is what, one, cools it, lubricates it, and it's also lubricating the gearbox, and, you know, just like a regular street motorcycle, except for you using it, you know, probably a little bit harder. I think we get this thing back on a good service regimen, and I don't think we're going to have some of these problems that we're seeing right now with the shavings and stuff like that. I got to get myself a service manual for this bike is what I really need to get. That way I'm not guessing and looking up. Supposedly it's everything's online. I went to the KTM dealer this week and tried to buy one, and he said everything that they have is pretty much online now. He talked to me a little bit about on changing the oil, kind of go back and forth on this. He said don't go clamping it down with too much force, and I'll go back through and get the torque specs here in a little bit. Now it's time to put oil in it, and I still haven't torqued everything, but check out this funnel. I got this, I think, at Advanced Auto Parts. It wasn't a whole lot of money, and the reason I bought it is because it's clear, for one, and for two, it holds a quart of fluid. But I like that it's clear, so that way, you know, if you have a regular funnel, you're always looking down inside the funnel and holding it up to the light to see if there's a bunch of garbage in it before you use it. This way, this will be perfect for the bikes. That way I know how dirty this is and how much effort I'm going to need to put into it into cleaning. It's taking it about as fast as I can pour it in, so... Yeah, we'll get this back on a good schedule, guys, so that way we can monitor the oil and the overall health of this bike. I don't think they beat it. I just think they neglected it. I think that's the issue. You know, looking at a lot of the stuff, it just looks like they didn't take care of it. They didn't maintain it, and it's only going to be as good as you maintain it. I'm going to put a spark plug in this. I bought one. I'm guaranteeing that the spark plug that's in this bike is probably the original, because the spark plug for this bike is like $25. So they're not changing the oil. I can't imagine they're changing the spark plug, because you got to pull the tank off. You might have to pull some plastics and stuff, but I'll have to look into it. But I've been doing a lot of research on this bike over the last few days, just to try to get familiar with it, because the only thing I really know is what I read and educate myself about on the internet. So please don't take any of this stuff that I'm doing as like an instructional video. I'm just bringing you along with me, showing you how I'm doing it. But I do have good common sense most of the time. The other day I was driving my wife's dirt bike, and you know how that goes. I was only going to get on it for just a minute. It's a little XR100R that I built a while back, and I was with my grandson, and I just said, well, I'm going to hop on your bike real quick. Told my wife that, and just real quick. And here I am riding wheelies 15 minutes later, still real quick, and looped the thing over backwards. Didn't hit my head. I did have my riding boots on, but looped it over backwards, snapped the rear fender off. Actually caught it on video. I'll put a link up above if you want to check it out. But yeah, I try to have common sense most of the time, not always. So here's 1 liter and it's got to have 0.1 liter more. And if you look right there, there's actually a sight glass window right behind the brake lever, and it's supposed to be at least half, if not up a little bit more, to the top 2/3 of that window. So that would be the 0.1 that we're going to add. How many milliliters in a liter? It must be what, 100,000? It's by tens. So what would that be? One milliliter? 100 milliliters? Is that what I need? 0.1. Alright, so after doing a little digging, this motor takes 1.1 liters, so I've already put 1 liter in it, so I need to put 0.1 more liters, so that's 100, and I've done the math, so that's 100 cc's, or 100 milliliters. Now it's probably not necessary that I go this technical, but the reason I am is because I want to make sure that I'm putting in known values, so when I take out the oil the next time I'll probably measure it just to make sure, verify I don't have any leaks or it's not burning it or whatever. So that way if I have a known volume or value that I'm putting into it, I'll be able to on the other end figure out how much I'm getting out of it. There we go. It's 100 cc's right there. Aside from torque and everything, our oil change is done. Just about 2/3 of the way up into that sight glass window. Perfect. Right, in order to pull the tank off, I've actually got to unplug. This is a fuel injected bike, so I got to unplug the connector for the tank. Got the tank off, and now, man, this is tight in through here. How do you get the spark plug boot out? Wow, that is super tight. Holy. Wow. I'd be surprised if that wasn't the original plug. Holy. Can't get over how tight this is in here, guys. Super tight clearances. Yeah, I'm guessing it was probably the factory plug. Do you see how loose that was in there? And the plug's still down in there. Alright, I'll try to fish it out with a magnet. It's not new though. It has been in there for a little while. Oil fouled, that's a little concerning. So I'm guessing probably it's going to need a piston and rings, and probably hasn't even had a valve adjustment. Probably wouldn't hurt just to check it and adjust it right now. That way at least we'd know, right? Yeah, I figure while I'm right here I'll adjust the valves, and maybe I'll even do a compression test on it. I don't know. I think it's probably going to need a new piston, guys. That's what I'm guessing. And it probably didn't help that the oil filter the other day didn't have any oil in it whatsoever. None. It had never been oiled. I'm guessing the valves probably are out of adjustment too. The internet is a wonderful thing, so I've been trying to find out getting this up to top dead center and where the cams need to be. A lot of times on like street bikes there'll be like a little dot on each of these cam gears, and the dots either face up or the dots face each other, and that signifies top dead center so that you can actually check the valve clearance. You see this bolt right here? You pull this bolt out, and then there's a washer in behind this bolt. You take the washer off. Once you find top dead center, you screw this back in, and it'll fit into a notch inside the crankshaft, and it'll lock the crankshaft at top dead center. The manual shows the cams looking like this orientation. So this hole facing up when it's at top dead center, and then this hole, you know, like facing canted off a little bit. Fortunately for me, I found a video showing where the cam position needs to be, because the service manual doesn't show it. That dot there and that dot there, this part of the camshaft needs to be lined up to that to be at top dead center. Basically, I pull this out and then pull off the washer on the back, and it should engage the crankshaft. There's the thick little washer, and it has that little head in it to fit in the notch in the crankshaft, but I'm going to disconnect the battery because the last thing I need to do is be bumping the starter wire while this is engaged in the crankshaft. There it is, guys, right there. And you can actually see it has a little dot in the center of it. So I'm going to take off that little bushing off that, screw that right back in, and that'll lock the crankshaft right in place. I got to make sure that I remind myself that that's in there, so I'll probably hang something off like the dirt bike handlebars or something to let me know that this is in there, because that's the last thing that I need to mess up, is leave this in there and then turn the bike over with this in it. And I told you earlier I was going to cut the filter open, and I kind of wanted to see what it looked like, so I just took a razor blade and just went around the filter material just like this. Did the same thing on this side, and then cut it free from this cage. So this would be the outside right here, and this is the inside. And you can see that it does have some shiny particles in there, but you know, that could be from the gearbox and valve train and whatever else wearing. Now we know there's not any huge shavings in there. Alright guys, I don't know how this video is going to end up getting edited or cut at this point, but I'm in the following day, and I had to do some thinking and processing this because I was just getting thoroughly confused, thinking that my valves were way out of spec. And they actually aren't. After looking at this, I realized what I was doing is I've redrawn this, so you can see this measurement right here, 0.006. Well, that's in thousands. But the exhaust specs are initially written out in millimeters. So I was thinking that my valve is way tight. I was thinking, you know, 6 here, and it's got to be at 13, so we're way tight. Thinking, you know, 13 to 18, you got to bring it up into that range. Well, then you look at the feeler gauge and you see that it's 152. So that's actually 15 for the exhaust, which I can have 13 to 18, so that puts it right in the middle. So I guess I just really wasn't understanding it, guys, that well. So the only one that is tight is my exhaust on the right-hand side. So we're at 12, and we're allowed to be 13 to 18. And this intake is a little tight. So we can have 10, and we're at 10 right here. So I guess where I'm at is I'm thinking I'm probably going to shim this valve a little bit, open that up, so we're gonna have to put in a thinner shim in here to open up this clearance, and while I'm in there I will open this one up a little bit as well to try to get it to 5. When I look in here at the bolt head, I can see that someone had been in here before by the light marks on it, which indicates to me that this is supposed to have a valve adjustment from the dealer at the first hour of use, and I'm guessing that's probably the only time anyone's ever been in these valves by the looks of it. Which brings me right back again to, I think we're right around a very low hour bike. That kind of confirms that. I don't think the valves have ever been adjusted other than the first time they were done. So after doing some research, this plug was really wet and oil fouled, and that can be caused by a bunch of different things. Could be the piston rings have so much slop in them that it's allowing blow-by to the spark plug. One of the things that it also said could be a cause is if it hasn't had an oil change in a long time and that the oil gets thinned, it can allow the oil to push past the rings, and the oil actually looked pretty thin, and it actually smelled like gasoline. And I told you that it actually smells like in the gas tank, smells like turpentine, so it's probably got bad gas, and it's probably washed maybe down into the base of the motor. I'm hoping that's why, but I'm going to do a leak down test. Basically what that's going to do is you bring the motor to top dead center, which we've already done, and we've locked out the crankshaft so that both valves are closed. We're going to introduce pressure into the cylinder, and we're going to listen and see if we hear air escaping out through the oil drain filler, and you're going to get some. Even with a brand new motor, brand spanking new motor, you're not going to have zero leakage. Air is going to escape past the piston rings. That's a given. So there would never be an instance where you have no leakage past the piston rings. We should hear maybe a little air escape, hopefully not a lot. We might hear it escape out through the exhaust, so we'll pull the plug out. That would indicate that an exhaust valve is leaking by. We also might hear it leak past out the air filter area with the throttle open. That'll tell us that we've got a leak on the intake valve. And it'll also tell us if we got a blown head gasket. We'll release the radiator cap, and if we see any bubbling in there, we'll know that we've got a leak as well. So this will tell us a number of different things by doing a leak down tester. We can't do a compression test, which was I was hoping to do, to see how much compression this had, and it would tell us how well the cylinders and valves are sealing, because this has a decompression valve on the cam. That's what this little mechanism is right over here. It releases pressure on the cylinder to allow the bike to spin over a little bit easier, so it would never give us an accurate reading. Alright, so I'm going to connect my gauge. We got it all hooked into the cylinder. To find out how much leak you have, this is the air coming in, this is the air escaping. So you would compare these two readings. So if I had 100 psi on this gauge and 50 over here on this one, that's going to mean a 50% air leak, or 50% of the air is escaping somewhere, and then you got to find out where that's escaping from. We'll go up to like 75 psi over here, and then we'll read the gauge on this side. Wow, this is a wicked good tight bike, guys. So I'm at 74 right here, and I'm at 72 for loss. So that's like nothing. That's super tight. I have to believe that this bike is actually a very tight motor. That's a super low loss. So 74 to 72. Let's go check that. And we had no bubbles in our radiator, which would indicate a blown head gasket. These results are great, guys. So we tested it at 74, showed a result of 72. That gave us a 2.7% loss. That is incredible. This motor is super tight. Then we go to the Google, and it said for normally aspirated engines, 5 to 10% loss indicates the engine is in great condition. If it reads between 15 and 20%, it's not a reason for condemning it, but more concerned with the leakages occurring. And at 30%, there's some major problems and an overhaul is likely. I'm going to test it again, one more time, just for the heck of it. I'll probably test it a few times to make sure that we stay within these percentages. But yeah, this is a super healthy motor. So again, I'm looking down in here to make sure that I don't see any coolant leaks. I'm occasionally opening the throttle to make sure that I don't hear any air escaping out through the throttle body. And I'm also listening by the exhaust to make sure that I don't hear any air escaping through the exhaust, which would indicate an exhaust valve. We'll go back up to 75 or 74 and see where our losses are. Hopefully you guys can see that, and it's nice crystal clear. 74 in, 72 out. The air is entering the spark plug hole, blowing past the piston rings, escaping out through here. That's the noise that we hear. And I don't hear anything coming out the intake, and I hear nothing coming out the exhaust. We'll back this off and consider that a successful test. I want to tell you guys how I also figured out that I think that these are accurate hours, because I asked the person that I bought it from if they had the actual certificate of origin, which is basically the title. On that title, it says 0 hours in the date that this was received at the dealership. So that tells me that the dealership put an hour meter on this bike and categorized it as 0 hours. And then several months later, there's a second name on the back of that certificate of origin, and it says 1.9 hours, and it's from the same town that that dealer is in. So I believe that this hour meter on this bike is accurate to this bike based on everything that I've showed you with the pegs and everything that I've talked about, especially now with the leak down test. I think that this is probably accurate to 26, 30 hours on this bike. I know it sounds crazy, but you know, a lot of people, especially if it's an older person, they buy something, They don't have the opportunity to use it as much as they thought, and it ends up sitting in a shed or a garage somewhere for the majority of its life, and I think that this bike has. There's not a lot of rust on it, so I think it's also been stored and covered for a very long time. So that's some pretty good news. So stay tuned, guys. When I get my shim kit in, I'll shim the valves, ride it for the rest of the season, see if the thin oil causes that little puff of smoke that occasionally happens to go away. And if it does, great. Then we know that the valves will be good for a whole nother season. And if not, then I'll probably pull it apart and do pistons, rings, and maybe valve seals if it looks like to be that. So I want to thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for tuning in. I will see you soon. Like, comment, subscribe. See ya.